in my left hand. Deborah took the photo. Then Jack Nicholson called. He had come out for the weekend to watch a televised boxing match with Hunter. Hunter, not knowing Jack had brought his daughters, slipped over to Jack's house, broke out a window, and threw in several hundred lit firecrackers. Scared the hell out of Jack's girls. Jack was pissed. He cussed Hunter up one side and down the other, then hung up. We listened over Hunter's speakerphone. Hunter said, "Oh, shit. I didn't know he brought his kids with him." By the time Jack called back, he and his daughters were calmed down. He didn't call Hunter as many names. Hunter apologized. By the third call, everything was fine. All was forgiven. Hunter was a wild man, but he was also a Southern gentleman. He was hard to hold a grudge against. But many people did and still do, including people from his hometown, his home state, Kentucky, Louisville. After long talks, Hunter and I exchanged gifts, and I loaded my family up, and I drove on through what remained of the night all the way to 261 Columbus Avenue, North Beach, San Francisco, where we hooked up with Lawrence Ferlinghetti. The only ones for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars. And in the middle, you see the blue center light pop, and everybody goes, "Oh." Jack Kerouac, outlaw writer. To live outside the law, you must be honest. Bob Dylan, outlaw poet. An outlaw can be defined as somebody who lives outside the law, beyond the law, not necessarily against it. By the time I wrote Hell's Angels, I was riding with them, and it was clear that it was no longer possible for me to go back and live within the law. There were a lot more outlaws than me. I was just a writer. I wasn't trying to be an outlaw writer. I never heard of the term. Somebody else made it up, but we were all outside the law. Kerouac, Miller, Burroughs, Ginsberg, Kesey, me. I didn't have a gauge as to who was the worst outlaw. I just recognized my allies, my people. Hunter S. Thompson, outlaw writer. Hunter and I had discussed many people we both knew. I told him my next stop was San Francisco and a visit with Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I told him about all the work I was doing with Lawrence. Hunter had the greatest respect for Ferlinghetti. He wrote a long note on He Was a Crook Nixon obituary poster and asked me to hand deliver it to Lawrence. I told him I would go to Louisville for a week-long visit. Lawrence gave a standing room only reading at the University of Louisville where I was teaching. At his request, I took him to visit Thomas Merton's grave at the Abbey of Gethsemane. Brother Patrick Hart, Merton's secretary and editor of his journals, gave us the grand tour of the Abbey. On the hour-long drive back to Louisville, Lawrence told me about Merton spending the night with him in San Francisco, the last night of his life in the USA, before heading on to Asia, where he had 3 talks with the Dalai Lama, inspiring him to become more ecumenical in his worldview. After the 3rd talk, Merton died, supposedly an accidental death of electrocution. Ferlinghetti suggested I bring the Dalai Lama to Kentucky for a talk and to visit Merton's grave. A year later, in April '94, the Dalai Lama came to Kentucky. I had the opportunity to ask him one question. It was a powerful, life-changing experience. That's when I wrote the Never Give Up poem with him. The poem is now all over the world. In May 1993, I spent a long weekend at Ferlinghetti's apartment on Francisco, Telegraph Hill, North Beach, San Francisco. On the return flight back to Kentucky, I wrote Searching for Lawrence Ferlinghetti, San Francisco, May 1993. After the death threat, I called Ferlinghetti and told him about our trip out west. He invited us to meet him at City Lights, so I drove nonstop from Owl Farm to City Lights. Lawrence took us to a fantastic Chinese restaurant down the hill for dinner. Then back at City Lights, he gave each of us $100 worth of books. I gave him the poster Hunter inscribed for him, plus he bought hundreds of copies of the limited edition He Was a Crook poster, plus hundreds of other Published in Heaven posters he asked me to bring, posters I published by of work by Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, Herbert Huncke, William S. Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, Neil Cassidy, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Diane DePrima, Robert Hunter, and others. The next day, we wandered all over North Beach, walked Golden Gate Bridge, then headed on to Yosemite, Sequoia National Forest, Painted Desert, the Grand Canyon, and other stops, then back to Louisville. Soon as we unpacked, before I drove nonstop to Cambridge, Massachusetts to meet the Dalai Lama for the second time, I went to visit Hunter's mom, Virginia. Hunter asked me to start visiting her and keep an eye on her because more and more filthy bastards were bothering her, claiming to be friends of his, trying to get inside information for unapproved biographies. That was the beginning of my friendship with Virginia Thompson, a remarkable lady, retired librarian who loved her bourbon. She called often and invited me to visit, and at the end of each call, she always said, "Oh, Ron, please bring me some bourbon. You'll have to sneak it in, though. They won't let me have it here." So I did, and the first thing she said when I arrived was, "I promise not to talk about Hunter today." But after her second glass of bourbon, Hunter was her main topic of conversation for the next few hours and the rest of the bourbon. Virginia was a delightful person. I thoroughly enjoyed our visits. And I sure saw Hunter in her. I learned more about Hunter from Virginia than I ever learned from any other source. Dr. Hunter S. Thompson is dead. I followed his life and work from the release of Hell's Angels until now, here in San Francisco at the beautiful Canessa Gallery, August 17th, 2021, a day before Hunter's birthday. Hunter shot himself February 20th, 2005, in the kitchen at Owl Farm. Saying, "Here, hold this. It'll get us both into trouble one of these days." Probably. He is gone. In the kitchen, I drank and did drugs with him and watched basketball. One night, years ago in early May, my son Nathaniel and I arrived driving 24 hours nonstop from Louisville, Kentucky to Owl Farm just in time to watch the NBA playoffs with Hunter. I had published 2 more posters by Hunter, and I was there to give him copies, plus get him to sign some. Don Johnson called several times wanting us to come over and watch the game. Kentuckian Rex Chapman was playing for the Phoenix Suns. The Suns were down by 9 points with 1 minute to go in the game. I looked at Hunter and said, "I'll bet you that Rex will hit 3 threes and tie the game, that the Suns will win by 1 point in 3 overtimes." Hunter looked at me and laughed. Rex hit 3 threes and tied the game, but Phoenix lost in 3 overtimes by 1 point. I got damn close. Hunter paid even closer attention to me after that. We talked about life, about our families, about literature. Hunter was a good, kind man. He was full of life. He was tough. He was a real human being. He was spirit, Holy Spirit, no matter what anyone says. I had the honor of producing the official Hunter S. Thompson tribute at Memorial Auditorium on 4th Street in Louisville, Kentucky, Hunter's hometown, December the 12th, 1996. We had a sold-out standing room only audience of over 2,000. I brought in Hunter's mom, Virginia, his son, Juan, Hunter's bodyguard, Sheriff of Pitkin County, Bob Broadus, Johnny Depp, Warren Zevon, David Amram, Douglas Brinkley, Roxanne Pulitzer, and many more. They were all in Louisville for a week. I put them up at the Brown Hotel. I hired 7 Lincoln Continentals and 2 limousines. The mayor gave Hunter the keys to the city. The governor named Hunter, Johnny, Warren, David, Doug, and me Kentucky colonels. It was a spectacular 4-hour event. Hunter stands shoulder to shoulder with Mark Twain, John Steinbeck, Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, with America's best prose writers. People continue to say that there will be no audience for Thompson's work, that no one will understand or care. Yet as I travel across the USA and around the world working with young people, I witness a movement away from the constraints of non-democratic, Puritan, totalitarian cultures. I see a new generation that recognizes the lies of the power elite, a generation that is turning to the free thinkers, the freedom fighters of the 50s and 60s, recognizing and honoring them as mentors. Art is an innate drive that seizes a human being and makes her or him its instrument. The artist is not simply a person acting freely in pursuit of a merely private end, but one who allows art to realize its purposes through her or his person. Artists have moods, free will, personal aims, but as artists, they are bearers of a collective humanity, carrying and shaping the common unconscious life of the species. We must look beyond the life of the artist to the work, the body of work itself. That is the measure of success. Like those who have re-examined George Orwell's 1984 to find a multi-layered literary masterpiece, we must look deep into Thompson's works and discover the many layered messages. His books, especially the early ones, and his letters are literary masterpieces equal to the best writing ever produced. I often hear a Hunter fan say, wouldn't Hunter sneer at Gonzo Fest and all the honoring you're doing of his life and work? Wouldn't he see it as selling out? I always respond with, hell no. Hunter knew he was a hell of a writer, one of the best. He knew he deserved the recognition. He always talked about and watched film footage from the official tribute I produced in '96. He was proud and thankful to be honored in his home state of Kentucky, his hometown of Louisville. He had a rough-ass time growing up. Being a genius juvenile delinquent got him into trouble more than once. He was finally run out of town just before his high school graduation. He loved Louisville and Kentucky, but because of the way he was treated by the old ruling gentry, he despised many aspects of the culture, as do I. Hunter S. Thompson's work is a terrible saga of the ending of time for the American dream, with its actions set at the heart of American materialist culture, with violence, the Hells Angels, and war, fear and loathing in Las Vegas as perpetual background. Hunter S. Thompson, like the prophets of old, shows how we, through greed and power lust, have already gone over the edge. As Jack Kerouac, through his brilliant oeuvre, breathed hope into international youth culture, starting with his 1957 epic On the Road. Thompson shows how the ruling power elites are not about to share what they control with idealists yearning for a world of free creative expression, of equality, peace, love, tolerance, understanding, and healing. Hunter still has the power to disturb those who cling to the past. Hunter still unnerves the ruling elite. Those folks intentionally focus on the drugs, the booze, and the crazy man antics, the weird turned pro, the wild man persona he created, and they do all they can to dismiss Hunter's writing by dismissing his lifestyle. Honoring Hunter S. Thompson's life and body of work is long overdue. After Hunter shot himself, I wrote Hunter Shaman Thompson is Dead, a tribute, and 14 suggestions for Louisville to honor Hunter S. Thompson. I produced a memorial in Louisville at the Rudyard Kipling, but Louisville, Kentucky remained quiet, still embarrassed, utterly mortified to its gentrified roots by the life of one of its finest writers. Truly, I tell you, said Jesus, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Luke 4:24. Can I get an amen? While papers around the country and the world published long articles of appreciation and praise of Hunter's writing career, the Courier Journal, Louisville and Kentucky's leading newspaper, managed a cartoon mocking Hunter and a small piece by columnist Bob Hill. I've heard more than once that Hunter S. Thompson is a madman, that, oh, look at what he could have done if he lived a more sane life. Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel in The Town Beyond the Wall says, Mad Moishe, the fat man who cries when he sings and laughs when he is silent. Moishe, I speak of the real Moishe, the one who hides behind the madman, is a great man. He is far-seeing. He sees worlds that remain inaccessible to us. His madness is only a wall erected to protect us. To see what Moishe's bloodshot eyes see would be dangerous. In Jewish mysticism, the prophet often bears the facade of madness. Hunter S. Thompson stands in direct lineage to the great writers and prophets, and as the prophets of old, the message may be too painful for the masses to tolerate, to hear, to bear. They may, and usually do, condemn, even kill the messenger. Hunter stood as long as he could. He fought a valiant fight. He was a brave yet sensitive soul. He was a sacred warrior. He saw with the eyes of a poet. Henrik Ibsen said, to be a poet, but most of all, to see. Hunter saw, he felt, he recorded his visions. He took alcohol and drugs to ease the pain generated by what he saw, what he felt. He lived on his own terms. He died on his own terms. Did the masses kill Hunter? Did he kill himself? He found the courage to stand up against the power mongers and the masses. At least 13 times he should have died, but miraculously didn't. He chose to take his own life. He completed the work he came to do. Knowledge, from the inception of modernism and through postmodernism and chaos to the ocean of consciousness is reorganized, redefined through poetry, literature, art, music, and film. The genres are changing. The canons are exploding, as is culture. The mythopoetic artistic creations of cutting-edge artists are life-changing forms of a culture, a civilization, a world in which humanity lives not securely in cities nor innocently in the country, but on the apocalyptic, simultaneous edge of a new realm of being and understanding. The mythopoet, female and or male, returns to the role of prophet seer by creating myths that resonate in the minds of readers, myths that speak with the authority of the ancient myths, myths that are gifts from the shadow realms of the creative imagination. Since 2010, my friend Denny Humphrey and I, along with a handful of amazing production team members, have produced an annual Gonzo Fest, a celebration of the life and work of Louisville native son Hunter S. Thompson. In 2014, the mayor and the city of Louisville joined in to support our efforts. In 2014, Ralph Steadman also sent me numerous Hunter portraits. The Gonzo Fest production team unanimously selected one to go on the giant Hunter banner, which was placed on the side of the Bristol Bar and Grill on Bardstown Road in the heart of the Highlands, Hunter's old stomping ground. I asked Ralph Steadman to paint the words Hunter's Gonzoville, which we also added to the enormous banner. 22,000 vehicles passed the Hunter's Gonzoville portrait banner every day. I asked Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher to permanently change the name of Louisville to Hunter's Gonzoville. Man, you don't know till you ask. At the 2014 Gonzo Fest, he issued and read a proclamation changing the name of Louisville to Hunter's Gonzoville for the week of Gonzo Fest. It was a big victory. I told Hunter about it. He said, "It's about damn time." I talk to Hunter sometimes. The 10th anniversary Gonzo Fest will take place September the 11th at the High Horse Bar, the roughest and toughest place in town. We'll have music and spoken word on large outdoor and indoor stages. Gonzo Fest draws thousands of Hunter Gonzo fans from around the world. 7 years ago, my sweetheart and life partner, Jen Bug, and I attended a Gonzo Fest presentation by Margaret Ann Harrell, at which Margaret Ann displayed and discussed handwritten letters from Hunter she had been carrying with her around the world in a trunk ever since she edited Hunter's The Hells Angels book for Random House. After her presentation, Jen and I invited Margaret Ann to dinner at the Brown Hotel. Jen suggested to Margaret Ann that her letters exchanged with Hunter be published in an exquisite coffee table size limited edition book. The three of us talked and talked. We all three agreed it was a wonderful idea, and yes, okay, let's do it. After the project was up and running, Jen gracefully bowed out. For the past 5 years, I have been collaborating with Margaret Ann every step of the way, editing, adding, deleting, streamlining, expanding, everything. In April and May 2019, when I was served as UNESCO writer in residence in Estonia, I hunkered down at the Carl Ristokivi Museum where I was staying and worked nonstop on the Hells Angels letters manuscript to shape it, to give it the conversational tone that I knew Margaret Ann wanted. Thank you to my dear friend Margaret Ann Harrell for granting me the great honor of working with you on what we came to call the book. Thank you to Charles Cunningham at Norfolk Press for producing one of the most beautiful coffee table limited edition books ever published. And thank you to Zach Stewart for opening the historic Canessa Gallery for our 3 days and nights of events and for the month-long exhibit, and to Charles for your brilliant curation of the exhibit. Thank you to Grant Goodwine for your kick-ass artwork. And thank you to my sweetheart Jen Bug for suggesting to Margaret Ann the idea for the book. Whether you know Hunter as a madman or a visionary, of Hunter S. Thompson's life and work and the Gonzo spirit in the whole wide world. I invite all of you to join forces with us in Hunter's Gonzoville on Saturday, September the 11th. And remember, the edge There is no honest way to explain it because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over. Happy birthday, Hunter. Thank you all. Yeah. Woo! For a moment.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce the concluding John Brick, our young PhD student at Marquette, whom we're very grateful to have here. I just want to make a comment because Ron's stories and my stories sometimes diverge a little tiny bit, which you probably not be surprised. So when his wife suggested that she actually had a vision, I hope she doesn't mind I say it. She had, well, I will say it's a little, I will say the story a little different. About 20 years before that, I was in Europe. And I was just first beginning to study meditation. And I went to this channeling, but it was from meditation people who really studied a lot. And I just didn't take what the person said very seriously. But I just said what I was concerned about was, will my book ever be published? I was working on a book since forever. And he said, it was a he, I see your book in a window, a bookstore window. And I thought, oh, geez, so it's going to get published. And then 1995, a year later, in New York, in Durham, North Carolina, I was asked to present something at the J.B. Rhine, the parapsychologist pioneer, his 100th birthday. And so it was a parapsychology convention. And I went to one of their parties, and just casually, I talked to a lady, and she said she was a psychic for the police sometimes. She helped them find children and all. And so I did the same thing. I said, well then, will my book ever be published? Then the same thing. She said, I see it in a bookstore window. And I thought, well, gee, on two continents, they tell me the same thing, which is music to my ears. And so then Ron invited me to the Gonzo Fest. And that was we started this in 94, and this was 2014. I'd waited a long time. My book by then was published. I had books published. But I was to talk at a bookstore. And I went to the bookstore, and in the window, there was my book. And so I thought, powerful energy is here. So I went in and gave the presentation at this bookstore, and it was there that the third vision came from his wife. She said, you must turn the letters into a picture book. And I had already written a book about extracting hunters, keep this quiet, my memoir. So I was not going to repeat that. I was never going to use Hunter. I was never going to make my memories something commercial. But her vision was an art book. And I held to that. When Ron came in, he held to that. It's going to be an art book. Otherwise, I wouldn't ever have gotten near the project. And so it had to be an art book. It had to have scans of these images live. It had to be in color. And I would write narrative to go with it and do research to explain the references in the letters. So imagine getting that published. It's not commercial. Imagine any publisher. Where is the publisher? Oh, there he is. Imagine any publisher who would take on such a project. And so I was thinking, first of all, I was waiting all this time for my template from his wife, and she never gave me my template because I wanted a template for art and words to put them together on the same pages. And so I was thinking, is this going to have to be self-published? But who's going to pay for publishing, printing? And Ron kept pushing me. He said, "Don't give up." Don't. His famous phrase. He was saying, "Keep going. Don't give up." And Jen, and I think he too, said, "There's a publisher out there." I said, "Okay, where is that publisher?" And I did not go to publishers, but I tried literary agents, and they said, "Oh, this is a wonderful project." They did, but they said it's not for me, which I knew before starting. And finally, I said, "Okay, I'm going to call a printer, and I'm going to see if I could possibly afford to print it." And I called Prepress Printing. And this man answered the phone, and I said, "I'm going to try to impress this man because I know this is an expensive project, and I want him to give me a price and take me seriously." So I was very, very earnest, and I tried to be impressive, and I knew exactly my project. And lo and behold, this gentleman over here, Charles Cunningham, said, "Well, I can give you a price. I can do that, but I want to publish the book." And I fell on the ground, and he said, is it written? And I said, "The whole thing, yeah." And he said, "Send me the manuscript in my file transfer, and I will, I'll look at it and give you a contract." And lo and behold, the next morning I woke up and there's a contract in the file transfer, my account he had set up. And so this is all totally and utterly magic.
And since this is the only opportunity we'll have to discuss this, so I just need to take one more minute to say something about the magic involved in working with Margaret Ann for 5 years on this book. I have edited and published hundreds of titles, including, I got a little jumpy on 2 of them. I took a piece William S. Burroughs wrote about Jack Kerouac, and a prose piece, and I turned it into a poem, and I didn't tell him until I published it, and I was shipping it to him, and when I was at the post office thinking, "Oh shit," but he loved it, and so I edited Burroughs, and Ginsberg went on tour in Ireland, and Bono opened up for him on some of those shows, and 2 weeks after Ginsberg got back, I got a handwritten letter from Bono, the lead singer for U2, with a check for $150, wanting to order some of my titles, which opened the door for me to ask for a poem from him, which he sent me, American David, his brilliant poem about Elvis Presley, but it needed some editing. And so I edited that, and that was really weird. Would Bono be okay with me editing this poem? But I did, and he loved it. And so I thought I knew a few things about editing, but then I worked for 5 years with a master editor, and she put me through the ringer. And I really learned how to do it the right way from this young lady. So thank you. I want to say thank you, public, for showing me how it's supposed to be done.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So I want to say we are so lucky. This is another accident, but not that kind of total one. But John Brick wrote me. Some people they love to give hunters. It was a high end. This is first in paperback, high end, and people wanted to give it for like birthday presents and Christmas. So they have written me and asked me to sign it and send them a copy. He did that, and there is one other. He's a PhD candidate in Gonzo in Hunter, and there's one other one, And he is delightful. He's going to be on the panel tomorrow, Rory Patrick Feehan. And I knew if you were anything like Rory, I mean, Rory is all heart and intelligence, and he's Irish. And so I said, I invited him on the project, and he immediately struck me as, well, anyway, here he is. He turned out to be what I thought. He's a PhD candidate in English at Marquette University in Milwaukee. He came here from Milwaukee for this, specializing in American literary journalism of the 60s and 70s with a particular focus on Hunter and on Gonzo journalism. And he wants to see Gonzo Thompson studies coalesce around centralized comprehensive archives. So he's a scholar. He wants there to be archives. But he's not a dull scholar. He's just an interesting one. To that end, his work involves, locating and cataloging, occasionally from unusual places, material by and about Thompson heretofore unknown to literary scholarship. So alongside his dissertation, Gonzo Eternal, Brick is also presently compiling a thorough annotated variorum of Thompson's seminal Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He's doing a thorough annotated, so he's gathering things from everywhere to make an annotated. I don't even know what a variorum is. I don't even know what it is, of Thompson's seminal Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but don't tell his dissertation director about it.
Thank you. Oh, this one? Give me a moment. I'm just going to move this over. And TK, can we just bring that back to the first slide? Thank you. And now for something completely different. Right. Okay. So I want to begin by saying that it's a profound honor to be here tonight. So I think if I'd known that I'd be following none other than Ron Whitehead, I might have been a little more anxious in accepting Margaret's generous invitation to speak to you tonight. Of the many impressive names involved in this project, mine is not one of them. Yet. I am, as you've heard, John Brick, and I am, to borrow a familiar phrase, a hired geek. I'm at present a miserable scrivener of the academy, a graduate student, wrapping up my PhD at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Go Bucks. And I'm studying Thompson and Gonzo journalism. And as you've heard, in this 50th anniversary year, I am working on that annotated variorum, which is looking at the differences, the variances between different versions of the text of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Margaret graciously invited me here to help celebrate the release of this fantastic new book by delivering some remarks on my own doctoral research, which I promise will not be as dull as that makes it sound. So, I want to tell you a thing or two about the state of Gonzo in traditional academia, which is not always the same thing as Gonzo out here in the real world. No. There we go. That's the first slide. Okay. The first problem, and maybe the biggest problem, is that there's still a tremendous quantity of information that we still don't know about Hunter S. Thompson. And all those gaps in our knowledge are teetering on the brink of becoming permanent losses. Despite all his books and his letters and all the remarkable work that's been done to preserve his memory in film and pictures and study, what we don't already know now, we may never know. The window of opportunity that scholars have to add something new to the big data set of what we know about the historical Thompson, the man himself, is closing. we are moving into a phase where the study of Thompson is more and more an increasingly overt act of recovery and preservation. Behind the great marble lions of the Schwarzman branch of the New York Public Library in Manhattan are hushed, wood-paneled rooms where researchers can pore over the collected papers of some true literary giants: Dickens and Tennyson, Virginia Woolf, W.H. Auden, Hawthorne, Ginsberg, T.S. Eliot, Kerouac, Nabokov, and dozens more. These writers have been studied for so long, their lives and works so closely examined, picked over, sifted, cross-referenced, and rendered granular, that anything new, no matter how small, that can be added to the data set of what we know about them is cause for a buzz of excitement among the scholars who study them. For a student who wants to work in close and come to grips with the teeming mind of a genius at work, well, you can sit down in a room in Manhattan or in one of 3 or 4 other archives and study their papers. But you can't do that with Thompson. There is no big centralized archive like that. No temperature-controlled vault in a university library that preserves the originals, the drafts, the scrapped ideas, the false starts, the variant versions, the carbons, the fair copy typescripts, or even just the smudged cocktail napkins upon which Thompson built his great works. All we do have, outside of private collections, and Mr. Johnny Depp, if you are listening, 414-304-8725, call me anytime. All we do have are a few tantalizing fragments tucked away here and there in minor holdings across the country, or hidden inside the catalogs of other writers' materials. We have the excellent Schoaf collection down in Santa Cruz. My own first visit is scheduled for Tuesday. I'm very excited. But even that is mainly just archived copies of rare publications, the texts of which are reprinted in available collections. We know Thompson saved everything: his drafts, his unpublished works, his holographs and ephemera. We know they exist, but they remain, for now, maddeningly out of reach. So, from this point of view, you can imagine what a fantastic zap of lightning it is to suddenly have 300 pages of this stuff just drop on you out of the blue, especially when you're finishing up your PhD. You can imagine what an unalloyed joy it is to have this new volume of fresh letters that offer genuinely new insights into Thompson's character and his literary gifts, captured in a moment of singular radical evolution. And it is precisely here where I want to add my own contribution to the plaudits and lauds for the Hells Angels letters, specifically in gratitude for Margaret's selflessness in choosing to release these private letters in a book, rather than sell them to the highest bidder and buy her own private Caribbean island. What this book represents to the sort of traditional scholarship that I engage with is really an archive of its own kind. Original material from Thompson, yes, incredible, but it comes with the history and the contexts and the connections that bring each new letter in this volume to life. This is the recovery of something precious before the possibility of reclamation is lost to time and floods and fire ants and the background noise of time. This is preservation when the resin is still hot. And for those of us laboring in the academic machine to lay the kind of groundwork within traditional scholarship for a sustained and mature body of scholarly inquiry into Thompson, this is nourishment of the very best kind. The second problem facing systemic academic study of Thompson today is that the myths are threatening to overrun the reality. Pound for pound, Thompson's legacy might have more myth in it than just about any other author you'd care to name. The exhaustively researched work by people like Rory Feehan and Tim Denevy and William McKean, absolutely crucial as they are to future generations of Thompson's readers, their work, and mine, is still essentially a rearguard action, staving off the mistruths and misunderstandings and misleading stories about Thompson that, by the inevitable accretion of time, gradually assume the aspect of fact. Thompson had to endure being turned into a cartoon in his own lifetime. Gary Trudeau saw to that. But as time goes on, the historical man the hunter figure and the Gonzo archetype are all together diluted by conflation with their cinematic counterparts and literary homages. Walk into any bookstore to pick up a copy of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it's more likely you'll see Johnny Depp's face on the cover than Thompson's. Troy Little's graphic adaptation adds a different kind of visual palette to Thompson's text. The late 90s cyberpunk transhumanist comic book series Transmetropolitan features as its protagonist an aging, manic, surly, and frequently drug-addled participatory journalist named Spider Jerusalem, who we see forced from his fortified mountain compound, sound familiar, to rave against social and political abuses in a far future United States in a colorful mashup of Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 and Thompson's Watergate coverage. To be clear, these examples are not all heedless, shabby, crude cash grabs looking to make a greasy buck off of Thompson's reputation. Of course not. But unlike a lot of people in this room, my future students will never be able to live in a moment where Thompson's work can be read separately from all of these adaptations and borrowings of his work and his. But while the march of time is often benign or at least not malicious, the same can't be said of the depredations of the dingiest corners of the internet, where Thompson is routinely quoted out of context, misquoted, memed, appropriated, misappropriated, skewed, subverted, and otherwise abused across the broad cross-section of society that spends its time on message boards, image macro sites, and conspiracy forums. The internet has granted Thompson a weird kind of half-life, endowing him with an immortal but progressively distorted version of his life and work and face, as his words and pictures are lifted from their social and historical contexts to accrete around a many-faced Gonzo apotheosis, distinct from, but still bearing the outward features of, its mortal progenitor. Online, Thompson is invoked as a natural supporter of everything, from the innocuous side of the spectrum, legal weed, gun rights, to things like sovereign citizenship, to the far side of that spectrum, cited in support of increasingly deranged conspiracy theories and overtly fascist ideologies. Clearly, they haven't read Tim Denevy's book. All of this with virtually no granular understanding of Thompson's actual principles. Thompson himself articulated a worry that his popularity would make him indistinguishable from Raoul Duke. But today, Thompson scholars must contend with the possibility that he may not merely collapse into Raoul Duke, but suffer a fundamental fraying, indeed a dissolution that threatens to render him into something far removed from the actual man. The internet, for the most part, doesn't preserve or recover as much as it mutates. And if all we are ever to know of Thompson is what we have available to us now, the action of that mutation on Thompson's legacy could prove irreversible. But now, we have the Hells Angels letters. And through it, and through Margaret's eyes, we can touch, retain, preserve an aspect of the original man that would otherwise remain perpetually unknown, lost to the roaring warp of time and the fumbling mishandling of popular culture. This book opens the windows, it lets the light in, fumigates the room in ways scholarly work alone struggles to accomplish. Something human is captured and preserved here where it hadn't been before. The Hells Angels letters restores texture to parts of Thompson's life where there was much less texture before, like a fuzzy picture snapping into much crisper definition. And while the broad architecture of Thompson's movements and writing has been sketched out elsewhere, the Hells Angels letters contributes that human insight, a deeply personal resonance, indeed a private intimacy that is lethal to the misapprehensions and misuses of Thompson that sprout in damp online message boards and Reddit fora. I am particularly struck by the clarity of introspection in Thompson's letter of 26 February 1968. That's on page 126 for those of you playing the home game, in which Thompson mentions his efforts to secure Oscar Acosta's book contract. It's totally different, a totally different tone and style from the fireworks of testosterone in his exchanges with Acosta that are reprinted in Fear and Loathing in America. I'm beyond delighted that Acosta's letters are included here too. And then there's the March 31st, 1970 letter, in which a lament over cardboard mailing tubes spirals into this fascinating digression on the economic realities of the Aspen wall posters and the Freak Power campaign. Or indeed, the Dexedrine tablets, taped to their handwritten note. Thompson was introduced to Dexedrine by Dr. Bob Geiger, to whom he eventually dedicated Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, not as a recreational drug to fuel cartoon zaniness, but as a legitimate tool to help with good, vigorous work. Graduate student knows something about that. In the Hells Angels letters, we see Thompson paying Dr. Geiger's gesture forward, in good faith, to someone who had earned his respect. All the familiar humor, the acerbic wit, the trenchant insight is here to be seen. But Thompson, like any good rhetorician, tailored his writing to suit his audience. And Margaret was, for him, a uniquely special audience. And these letters now allow us to resist the myths and the mutations and reintroduce tiny but crucial pieces into the complex mosaic of who Hunter S. Thompson was. We in this room know that Thompson was not a perpetually drug-addled lunatic clown, but what Margaret has gifted us provides us with an even sharper grasp of the author than we had before. And we are now much better situated to fend off mistruth. We will always have the film adaptations with us, always the Doonesbury cartoons and Spider Jerusalem and the many borrowings and assimilations and hallucinations of the Hunter figure, and that weird and frequently ugly half-life on internet message boards. But the Hells Angels letters cuts through the cloud to preserve something of the authentic human being, and that is as extraordinary and precious today as it is becoming increasingly rare. Before the end, let me drill down a little bit more to give you a clearer sense of what I mean and how the Hells Angels letters has put a real electric charge in the sort of work that I do. We academics dearly love our definitions, ginning up the best and most accurate demarcation of what a thing is and what a thing is not. And I am delighted to report that when it comes to Gonzo, after 50 years of trying, none of us have been able to figure out what the fucking thing is. Oh, we've gotten close, but you can't pin Gonzo down and anatomize it like a giant swamp frog pegged to a dissecting slab. Anytime you think, aha, I know what Gonzo is, I can describe all of it precisely, then it squirms and it shows you a new face. You can never capture every single aspect. Gonzo is an irreducible plural. There's always more to it, more to say, more connections to make. One of the first notions that Gonzo scholars have to dispel is this idea that Gonzo writing is defined by being totally off the cuff, extempore, 100% captured in an instantaneous paroxysm of writing and zapped directly to the printer. This is, of course, what Thompson himself described in Jacket Copy for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But although he himself admits that Vegas falls short of this artistic ideal, this notional Gonzo ideal has managed to work its way into the scholarly haggling and the popular conception over what Gonzo is in such a way that Gonzo is almost universally construed as the work of a solitary genius whose mind and eye are creatively inviolate. And the corollary being then that anything less, apparently, would somehow be un-Gonzo. And yet we've known, or at least made the reasonable assumption, that Thompson's writing was influenced by others. And now, thanks to this new book, we can see for ourselves the meticulous, granular evidence to demonstrate just how closely Margaret Harrell collaborated with Thompson on The Hells Angels. One only need read over their exchanges about verifying statements, tracking down evidentiary documents to back the facts and statistics, wrangling over the particular framing of certain episodes and events. And indeed, Margaret's wholesale dedication to defending Thompson's flights of literary peculiarity and her devotion to seeing his particular vision properly represented in the final work. All that we need to see, we have all that we need to see that the Hells Angels letters resists the romantic but inaccurate idealization of Gonzo only ever being produced by locking yourself alone in a tower, right? In fact, and I suppose this is the thing that would raise eyebrows if this was a community of traditional scholars, right? The Hells Angels letter speaks to an overtly collaborative face of Gonzo, an aspect of the Gonzo literary practice. And in fact, I believe Thompson himself knew this. My own scholarly project, the comprehensive annotated variorum of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, includes the recovery of a fair copy typescript of roughly the first 6,000 words of Fear and Loathing. This typescript is dated 20 April 1971, which makes it the earliest known extant draft. Thank you. Makes this the earliest known extant draft of any part of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas available to scholarship. This fair copy transcript, oops, ooh, we're going here. Bump it forward. There it is. This fair copy typescript has a title page, which has all the things you might expect from a title page, but it also included a number of notes penciled in Thompson's own hand. And for those of you who may be wondering, yes, this is just about the coolest thing that can ever happen to a scholar. Felt like fucking Indiana Jones there in the archive. Anyway, these handwritten notes turn the standard title page into something more like a movie poster. They basically list artistic credits the same way you'd see the names of people who worked on a film. On this title page, we see that Raoul Duke hasn't just written it, he has produced, directed, and narrated it. Music, he writes in these handwritten notes. Music by Brewer and Shipley, The Rolling Stones, Company C. Brewer and Shipley's One Toke Over the Line features throughout Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. The Rolling Stones are the Rolling Stones, right? And C Company featuring Terry Nelson are responsible morally, if not criminally, for the battle hymn of Lieutenant Calley. Art, he writes, by Ralph Steadman, of course, but also by one Steve Elvin. You might not know Steve Elvin's name. He was a graphic artist in the Bay Area, active in the late 60s and early 70s, but you've certainly seen his work. Steve Elvin drew the cyclopean owl that Thompson adopted as his personal sigil. Like Steadman and Tom Benton, though to a lesser degree, Elvin helped shape the popular look of Gonzo. And these handwritten notes are the only place that I've found that Thompson ever mentions his name. So to finally see in hitherto unprecedented detail how closely Margaret Harrell worked with Thompson on the Hells Angels confirms and corroborates this collaborative aspect, this facet of what Gonzo is. And crucially, what I think her book proves is that this collaborative aspect does not take anything away from Thompson's own unique genius. The Hells Angels letters, quite obviously, does not diminish the Hells Angels, right? If anything, it amplifies and enlightens Thompson's book. The only thing that's changed is now we get to peek under the curtain a bit at Thompson's early Gonzo coming into full flower with that collaborative element that was always already there to begin with, one facet among many. I want to conclude these remarks by borrowing a passage from Herman Melville that I think is appropriate here in the celebration of Margaret's book. This passage is taken from an obscure essay that Melville wrote about Nathaniel Hawthorne, urging Americans to appreciate what Hawthorne was doing to advance this strange new innovation at the time called American literature. The last words of the passage will, I think, be familiar, and they are perfectly suited to honor Margaret Harrell's contributions to the study of Thompson, to the eternal Gonzo, and to celebrate her achievement here. And now, my countrymen, as an excellent author of your own flesh and blood, an unimitating and perhaps, in his way, an inimitable man, whom better can I commend to you? He is one of the new and far better generation of writers. The smell of your beeches and hemlocks is upon him. Your own broad prairies are in his soul. And if you travel away inland into his deep and noble nature, you will hear the far roar of his Niagara. Give not over to future generations the glad duty of acknowledging him for what he is. Take that joy to yourself in your own generation. And so shall he feel those grateful impulses in him that may possibly prompt him to the full flower of some still greater achievement in your eyes. And by confessing him, you thereby confess others. You brace the whole brotherhood. For genius all over the world stands hand in hand, and one shock of recognition runs the whole circle around. Yeah, that's a joke. that's a cleverness from Thompson, but that's it. Thank you for your time and attention.
Let's see. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See, everybody brings something different. That was absolutely spellbinding. I enjoyed all of it. Thank you so much. And keep growing. You know, you're going to be a marvelous scholar. You're going to have a marvelous dissertation.
You're leading the Q&A. If anybody has any questions.
Oh, it's your show.
No,
It's your show.
No,
Okay.
you're doing.
Just Q&A. Oh, yeah. It's questions for them, not me.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
For these gentlemen.
You got a question, we got an answer.
2 or 3 answers, probably.
Anyone have questions? Are you full from all this? All this has come at you?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I thought both presentations were wonderful. Thank you both very,
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Having known Margaret for 30 years, I hope you guys have a large place to put a lot of papers. She's been carrying these for a long time, and I'm really glad she's getting the recognition that she deserves for her insight and forethought. I guess my question would be for you as a scholar, what drew you to Hunter Thompson and Gonzo journalism?
Yeah, thank you. I think my experience is common to a lot of people from my generation who encountered Thompson. Somebody said, "Hey, check out this crazy thing," and I checked out that crazy thing. And actually, my first introduction was to the film, to the 1998 adaptation with Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro, and yeah, it was funny. It was a spectacle. It was all kinds of things, but something about the political and cultural commentary that came through in that film so well. I had to go seek out the book. That was the next thing, and right from the first line, there was something about the cadence, the music of the writing. This is where the words start to fail because it's such an intuitive thing, but it made sense to me. It lit up my brain in a way that no other piece of writing has done. I don't know, maybe something about the way my neurons are wired, right? Maybe that predisposes me towards Thompson, but yeah, I read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and that was it. I was hooked permanently, and probably determined the course of the rest of my life.
Well, when Bunny fired Hunter and he went back home, I was trying to figure out what happened next. You gave a perfect description of collaboration, and collaboration was, I think, what produced the book that became, that it wasn't done only by Hunter, it was done by having someone who was sympathetic, was given the job probably because the moguls didn't want to deal with it, and created this thing. And it, to have it reproduced so perfectly, the color of it in the book is part of the story. So thank you.
But I
You
think
can thank
every-
Charles Cunningham for that.
collaborates.
We can thank
That's
Norfolk,
another, that's another,
Norfolk,
Yeah.
Norfolk Press,
That's another
Charles and
collaboration.
everybody at
Yeah.
Norfolk Press who played a role. And I've met some of these incredible people who helped in the production of the book, and everybody did a superb job. This is an art book of the first order, which is what we had dreamed of.
Charles is an artist. I said that from the first moment I saw what he started doing. And when he started talking to me, well, you know, this scan is not quite good enough. And I said, what do you mean? It comes from a lab. And he says, oh, but so-and-so, go, you know, do the scan again. Fine minutia of art. And that's the only thing I wanted for this book. But I think everyone collaborates, and if things are done well, they're opened up so that, you know, in some different ways, it's the energy coming in, it's the nourishment coming in, it's, you know, we don't do things totally by ourselves. And Ralph Steadman was a collaborator. I mean, he saw it that way. So.
And everybody collaborates in a different way. And for me, the best way, the way I collaborate with folks all over the world, which I love to do, is I let everybody know right off the bat. You agree what each person's going to do, your area of responsibility, and then they start the questions about, well, what about this? Should I do that? That's your area of responsibility. You have the complete freedom to shape this project the way you want to, and you offer encouragement every step of the way. Every step of the way.
Well, I would call you encourager in chief because you know how to encourage. Yeah. You, Ron, you know how to encourage. You're like encourager in chief.
I think the reason I was given the gift, which, thank you, which I received through one of the strangest experiences in my life, and this goes along with receiving a message from the Anna Mitchell Hedges Crystal Skull, which really started all this stuff, the main one of the crystal skulls, and meeting Anna Mitchell
You mean
Hedges.
you saw the crystal skull?
No,
you went to see
This
it.
is another story which would be discussed in the film that's coming out. I finally reveal and talk publicly about that encounter. I worked with a woman who was 30 years older than me for a long time, doing spiritual exercises and practices. She was an elder to first degree, and we were called to meet the Anna Mitchell Hedges Crystal Skull, which after that happened and we touched it after receiving a message, all these doors that I had wanted to open and tried to open, opened automatically.
Which crystal skull, Max?
The Anna Mitchell Hedges Crystal Skull, and it's
Oh.
another story. We don't need to get into it any more than my mentioning it tonight. And it was mentioned in one of and shown in one of the Indiana Jones movies. But these are real. There's one in the British Museum, and so the strange way I mentioned meeting the Dalai Lama and asking him to give me a message to share with young people. And he gave me a message, and it was recorded. And then this film that's coming out titled Outlaw Poet, The Legend of Ron Whitehead, they had animated the conversation between the Dalai Lama and me. And the strange thing that happened was all I heard. I thought I was hearing him say the words to the poem Never Give Up. So it was a spiritual transmission
Yes.
that occurred. And I found out later that many of the Tibetan teachers receive entire books that way, that they end up
Yeah.
writing and just writing down and teaching. And he came over after he gave after he came. That's Hunter and the Dalai Lama
Coming down.
energy right there. So anyway, I was given the gift after years of roller coaster ride, trials and tribulations, and determinedly never giving up. I was given the poem through the spiritual transmission titled Never Give Up. Never give up, no matter what is going on, never give up. Develop the heart. Too much energy in your country is spent developing the mind instead of the heart. Develop the heart. Be compassionate, not just for your friends, but for everyone. Be compassionate. Work for peace in the world and in your heart. Work for peace. And I say again, never give up. No matter what is going on around you, never give up. That poem's all over the world. And so that was an affirmation. The Dalai Lama came over and took my hand and bowed, blessing the message and me to spread the word. And that's all I've been doing since 94. And it's in posters, it's in his books all over the world. So I took it upon myself to encourage other people by sharing the poem and just any way I can to never give up. No matter what is going on, stick with it.
Margaret, I wanted to say, I'm an expert in sitting in a classroom. 6 years, 4 at Yale and 2 at Stanford. I'm an expert at noticing when I hear a lecture that I really pay attention to. You must have a lot of devoted students.
Are you?
But John does. John's a fantastic.
I'm talking to him.
Yeah, he's a fantastic
Okay,
teacher. I already
so-
know that.
Thank you. Thank you. I can think off the top of my head of 1 or 2 students who might disagree with you, but I will let them know that I come highly recommended.
You will be a marvelous professor if that's what you want to be. You will absolutely be.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Thank you all. We're wrapping up day 2 of the Hunter S. Thompson Letters Festival Global. Just going all over the globe via YouTube. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, TK and Kathy. And tomorrow, our final day, day 3 of the festival. Again, we have some of the greatest Hunter S. Thompson scholars in the world who will be joining Margaret, Ann, and me. We will co-host the panel discussion. We'll have William McKean, who is the chair of journalism for graduate and undergraduate studies at Boston University. Roy Patrick Finn, who just received his doctorate from the University of Limerick, where I have performed in Ireland, and
David Streitfeld again.
And Peter Richardson. Yes,
Peter
all
is
Thompson scholars.
Yeah, but Peter Richardson. This is at 2:00. These are utterly fantastic people, each one. Peter Richardson has a brand new book out, not quite out, about, I think it's produced.
Savage Journey. I think it's UCLA.
Savage Journey,
Yeah.
Savage Journey, UCLA Press. It has to do, I believe, with Hunter in California. But anyway, he is fantastic, and he's teaching now. He's had a crazy, interesting, fabulous, diverse career, but he's teaching he's teaching here in San Francisco. I think it's called San Francisco University. So he's one. David Streitfeld, New York Times reporter, Pulitzer Prize winner, who knew John Hunter and interviewed him 3 or 4 times. and then the other two. So in this room, we will have Peter Richardson and David Stripeville, and on remote screen in Ireland and Boston, we will have the other two, Rory and Bill McKee. So we
Okay.
invite you all to come.
Yes, please. Thank you all for coming out tonight. What a blast. All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.